Hey everybody, thanks for joining me here at PowerModz. Today we have the honor of being at Elka Suspension with Marc Kingsley here. He is one of the owners of Elka Suspension. When did you start this whole venture?
Oh, it started 14 years ago in 2000 with my two partners, Martin and John. So started pretty small, and here we are 14 years later.
Yeah, and your ATVs, UTVs, snowmobiles.
Side-by-side, motorcycle, off-road, meaning like BMWs, GS, and also racing motorcycles as well. Yeah. Special project, military project. We got a lot of stuff going
Spiders.
on. Spiders, yes, like T-Rex as well, like Campania, Campinino three-wheelers. So we do this, and pretty much every shocks that can be put on a power sport machine, either on-road or mostly off-road.
Or just about anything that anybody can dream up, right? Like you can custom build whatever.
Yep, exactly. It's a challenge for us. You know, if it's got a couple of wheels on it and needs some shocks, we're there to help.
Right on, right on. So we're here with Marc, and he's going to answer some questions about shocks because although we all have them on our ATVs, UTVs, and snowmobiles, but mainly we're talking about snowmobiles today, we don't know how they work, or some people don't. Some guys are very well tuned and dialed in with their suspension, you know, the guys that work them hard, but other people it's kind of like a hop on and ride kind of thing, and they don't really know what's behind a shock. So today you're going to answer those questions for us.
Perfect.
All right. So generally speaking, when you buy a snowmobile, an off-the-shelf kind of snowmobile with really no adjustments on it, you're getting just kind of a plain shock, right? You know, this is off one of my older sleds. And what is this? How does that work?
Basically, it's only a hydraulic cylinder that basically you hop a spring on. So this shock basically doesn't have any, let's say, oil in it. You will find inside of that specific shock a kind of small plastic bag with hair in it that basically is there to absorb the quantity of oil that goes in when shock compress. But basically, as you see here, when I compress, the shock doesn't go out. So basically, it's a simple shock that you'll find on a car door, or let's say in whatever. You know, it's not an active shock, if I could say.
So basically, it dampens.
It dampens one way and the other way, and basically, this one seems to be like a ratio 1-for-1. Well, enables you to have only one adjustment. Usually, these shocks come with a kind of a preload ring with 3 to 5 different preload positions. So by cranking it, you will preload the spring, so we'll make the spring feel stiffer. Your sled will be higher on the ground, so you'll have a stiffer ride. So this is the only kind of adjustment you will find on this specific shock. So these are made for the average rider. What is an average rider on a sled? It's basically a guy that weighs about 175 to 200 pounds, depending on the manufacturer, that rides, depending on the model. If it's a sport model compared to touring, you'll have some difference, but usually a stock OEM shock is made for Mr. Everybody. Right. So as soon as you're a bit more aggressive, you will need something that is adapted to your need. Oh. And one other thing about these shocks is after they're a couple of years, or maybe not even a year, depending if you're aggressive, sometimes they will leak. And these are non-adjustable, not non-adjustable shock, but non-revalvable shocks. So meaning you cannot open them and you cannot service them. So when it starts to leak, you throw them away, and you put another shock in.
Yeah. Now some of these, I have another one of these shocks back at the shop. When you compress it, you let go of it, it goes psst, and it pushes itself back out.
Yeah. These shocks are called emulsion shocks. Emulsion shock basically is the same kind of shock, but instead of having a small plastic bag with a small portion of air, you will have a pocket of nitrogen at the top of the shock when it's installed upward. And emulsion shock means that the nitrogen will blend inside of the oil. So by going up and down, the nitrogen will mix in the oil, and that will give you a shock that works good, better than these kind of shocks, but then again will fade at some point, because whenever oil gets contaminated with a gas or nitrogen, then you lose the initial hydraulic resistance. So it's a shock you start off. Shock's going a certain way, it's stiffer after a certain couple of miles. Well, after that, the shock starts to fade.
Okay, now when you're talking about fade, you don't see it as much in the winter with snowmobiles because it's a cold environment. But I'll notice with my truck or my UTV, my Razor, it doesn't take long, and I can't even touch my shock because it just gets so darn hot because it's just moving back and forth so much, and that heat is building up, right?
Yep. Well, for surely, in a hot environment, you will feel the shock fade a lot faster.
Yep.
Like in desert racing, we've got. You need to have very good oil. You need to have a shock that has, high flow to basically dissipate the heat. But in those kind of shocks, it's true that during the winter you don't feel as much.
We're lucky. We're lucky
yeah,
that way.
You're lucky, but again, at some point, they will fade. Is not maybe the good term, but basically because the nitrogen will get inside of the oil, even if it's cold, the small bubbles will go through the piston and basically will create a non-linear, if I could say, resistant hydraulic in compression and rebound. So you'll feel a kind of squishy effect at some point.
Right. And now what about a gas shock? There's gas and then there's air, right?
Well, yes, basically it's that's a little bit more technical. When you talk about an air shock, it means that instead of having a spring, basically an air shock is an hydraulic shock as well. So underneath the air canister, you will find the same kind of shock that we find here, but instead of having a spring, you will find a air canister that basically does about the same as the spring. So when the shock compresses, there's a rod inside of the air canister. The shock will compress, and the air chamber will compress as well. So as the air compresses, it creates a resistance like a spring.
Right.
One thing about the air shock, especially in sleds, as you go higher in altitude, air compresses. So if the air compresses inside of the reservoir, the air reservoir, then basically the pressure inside is not the same.
Right.
So at the bottom of the mountain, you won't have the same feeling as the top of the mountain.
That's right.
That's in our mind one of the
reasons?
drawbacks of the air shock. Second drawback, especially when you go in the mountains, out of the country, out of the trails, if you happen to break an air shock, basically it's like if you're losing a spring.
We've been there.
So you've been there?
Yep.
You've seen what happened?
Yeah.
So you end up running like on a shock with no springs.
It's flat.
It's
right.
flattened.
Yeah.
You don't get nowhere with that, and you can be in pretty much, I won't say the word, but
yeah, I know exactly where I've been there. I've been there. Okay, so once we move away from this, we're talking about a custom application, or let's say we want to upgrade.
Yep.
If I have a 2010 Renegade and I want to get that OEM shock off there, and I want to put something on that's better that I can tune and adjust, then where do we go?
We start with the Stage 1 Plus shock. Basically, this is a Stage 1 Plus shock. It's a shock with, like I was saying before, a separate floating piston inside that separates the nitrogen from the oil, so there's no mixture of both gas and oil. And basically, also you get a rebound adjustment.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there. What's rebound and what's compression for people who don't know?
Okay, compression is basically when the shaft of the shock compresses under a pressure like a bump. So the shock compresses, the shaft goes in, and then the rebound is when the shaft here, or the portion of the shaft itself, goes out. So compression goes in, rebound goes out. The reason why we put a Stage 1 Plus, or basically a shock with the rebound, is basically anytime you play with the preload of your spring, that means that you increase the initial pressure of on the spring. So basically, if you put a shock like that with a certain preload on the sled, and you increase it, you preload it, let's say an inch, for example. An inch on that particular spring will give you 5.8 kilogram more of pressure initially. So first, the shock will tend to go in extension faster. This shock wants to get back in full extension very fast. So what happens if you don't have a rebound like on this one? Whenever you play with the compression, the preload adjustment, you have an effect of kicking, of bucking at some point.
Right.
If there's too much preload, then you cannot slow down the rebound.
Right.
Basically, slow down the speed at which
it's almost it's like a buck. It's like
That's
bucking. It's like
bucking.
On my Razor 900 XP, it doesn't have a rebound adjustment on. When I hit the bumps, it just starts to oscillate, and you can't control the back end from
Exactly.
flying up.
You find out it starts to kick you off, and at the front, basically you'll lose some control as well. So every time you play with a preload and a spring, you're supposed to play with the rebound. Okay, so some other company will sell shock without rebound adjustment. We start with the stage 1 plus. So basically with the rebound. So anytime you want to increase the preload to have, because you have a passenger with you or because you get a lot of luggage, you want to crank up the rebound maybe 2 clicks at a time. So like that you get more, a better ride.
Yeah, when you're riding, you know something's not right.
That's
when
it.
you have a passenger on, especially that extra weight. If I throw Keeley on, sometimes his weight's so heavy that it breaks it down, right? But so no, that definitely is an important quality.
Yeah, it's very important. So that's the base. I would say the stage 1 plus is the option number 1 that we will recommend for a rider that wants to have a better ride. Yeah, it's a huge difference compared with these kind of shocks.
Right.
First, we make, like you've seen maybe earlier, is that all the shocks we make are custom built.
Right.
So you may end up where everybody that calls here will have to go through an ordering process to ride kind of sled they've got, the weight they do if they go riding 1 or 2 people on the sled, what kind of riding they do, like trails, backcountry, all of that, and we build the shock accordingly. One other thing that we won't see here, but sometimes we'll put dual or sometimes triple or spring setup. Right. So basically what happens is, why we do that is when we put one spring above another, it's to create a combination of spring force that gives you initial plushness. So in some condition, in some discipline, you want, like, or trail riding, you want to have a very soft initial, sensation. Like some people call it like Cadillac ride. You don't want to feel the bump. So a dual or triple rate compression spring will give you those kinds of.
So that's when you see those little tiny springs up top.
Exactly. So depending on the discipline, depending on the vehicle itself, the sled type, model, and year, we'll develop it accordingly. And usually you'll see at least 2 springs. Okay. It's very rare that we'll sell a shock like this with a single spring.
Right. Okay, now when we're looking at a shock like this, it's got this separate cylinder on the side. Sometimes I see they have a hose off that go into another area. What's that all about?
Basically, it's just a matter of fitting. When you see a reservoir attached to the shock, it's basically a piggyback shock in the language of shock. And when you've got a line attached to the reservoir, it's a remote reservoir shock. Okay. The only reason we do that is for fitting purposes. Is basically sometimes you want to put a piggyback head on at the back, especially at the back of a sled, and it's very complicated. So there's no room. Right. So everything hits. So instead of putting a piggyback head, we put a line, we route it, and we put it somewhere where it's accessible or not in the way of the track. So
is that for extra fluid, or is that a control device?
No, the reservoir, the remote reservoir or piggyback will do exactly the same. Some people, maybe in sled, in the snowmobile, it's not that important to have a remote reservoir. Some people will say, and let's say side by side, they want to have a reservoir as far as possible from the muffler, the exhaust. Sometimes they want to put it, in the cab to be able to adjust it. Right. But basically, the longer the hose is, the less or more the reaction time, reaction of the shock is less efficient. For example, you take a line, 10 feet long. Just imagine, a displacement of 1 inch on the shock, how much it will impact. So basically, here at Elka, we want to design as much as possible piggyback shock. So even either at the front, the center shock, or at the back. But sometimes it's not possible because of fitment issue. But like this shock, this is our standard top head for the Stage 5 shock for snowmobile. So it's pretty small. We remove all the excess material to have a very lightweight shock. So how a Stage 5 shock works, basically, you get the same kind of skeleton of the Stage 1 Plus that I've showed you before. So you get a top head, you've got the preload that basically is there to preload the spring. You've got the rebound adjustment. This model has another type of a rebound adjustment you can adjust by hand. Sometimes we'll have a rebound adjustment that is adjustable with a screwdriver. So the same internal, but the big difference, instead of having a floating piston, here we've got a full reservoir in which we integrate our high flow Stage 5 cartridge. This is the most important adjustment in the stage 5, and this is what makes our shock work so smooth, and that makes our shock so efficient from one discipline to another. So how does it work? Again, when the shock compresses, the oil wants to go upward because the volume of the shaft, that comes inside of the shock, the oil, the equivalent of volume, needs to be displaced in the reservoir here. So you see, if you can zoom in,
Here's a channel.
that's it. You will see that the oil will come.
Okay.
So the oil will come back inside of the compression adjustment, and will push a piston here, and we'll go through different orifices depending if it's a high velocity impact and low velocity impact.
So what are we talking, like off a cornice or off a motocrosser guy coming down hard?
Yeah, high velocity impact is basically the speed at which the
Right.
the shaft comes in. So example, in a sled, you jump a bank and you end up flat landing on the very hard packed track. So basically, boom, you'll receive a big impact.
Yeah.
So the velocity, the speed at which the shaft comes in will be high.
Right.
And basically oil displacement will be rapid inside of the adjustment. So we'll have the adjustment will be able to adjust or to absorb the energy of that high speed impact independently of a low speed impact. What is a low speed impact? Is basically when you go in a trail, you go down a slope and in a corner, and when you feel your sled going, diving, if I could
Yeah.
say. Is that a good example?
Yeah, dipping, yeah.
Dipping?
Yeah.
That's it. So depending on what kind of riding you do, you will be able to adjust low speed independently from the high speed. So if you want to have something that's very smooth, initially, in the trails, but you don't want to be surprised with a big, bottoming
Yeah.
impact if you hit something, hanging in there. So you want to have a high velocity resistant that absorb the energy and avoid bottoming out. Then you will be able to separate the two
Right.
adjustment. And then again, the rebound adjustment, as I mentioned earlier, is very important to match the exit of the shaft.
Right. So when we talk about valving,
Yep.
one guy says, "Well, I had my shocks valved for me. I'm 180 pounds, and my sled weighs this much." And another guy bought the machine, and he's 260 pounds, and he's got to send them out to get revalved.
Yep.
What are we talking about? What's valving?
Valving is basically inside of the shock, the main piston. You will have a shim stack on the compression and the rebound side of the piston. So basically, the piston is the main unit on which the oil will go through in compression and rebound. On each side of it, we'll put a stack of shim. Shim is a disc of certain material. So we stack them.
It's they're like a flexible disc.
That's it.
Okay.
Depending, and you get the different thickness, the different OD. So we create a recipe of shim stack depending on a couple of things: on the discipline, on what kind of spring you will put on the shock, the kind of oil. So the valving is very important. Valving, you cannot change a valving in a shock without changing, let's say, spring at some point.
Right.
Okay, because if a guy comes in and say, I want to have a bigger valving, a stiffer valving because it's bottoming out, and we only increase the valving stack, basically that makes the shock will work too much hydraulically.
So basically, valving, spring, everything sort of works together.
Yeah.
And when you're dealing with this factory shock, I mean, you just get what
That's it.
the pick
That's
of the
it.
roll of the dice. It's set up for, like you said, 175 to
All the
200
tests
pound
we
rider.
do, all the recipe we got as much as 9,000 recipe in our
Yeah.
system and growing each day. And basically we got a lot of testing on the field. It's a shock that is not valve right for the right discipline, for the right valving, even if you got all the adjustment, external adjustment, high and low speed, if the initial valving, basically the basic setup, is not good
Yeah.
for the discipline and the spring setup, you will have a shock that won't work
Yeah.
for you.
I've noticed, a lot of guys are kind of like hop on, ride and go, and I don't care about the shocks. But when you really start to pay attention, there are big differences, especially when you start to push the limits of the sled. You start to notice, oh, you know what, something needs improvement here. Something's not right, and then it always boils down to this.
Comes down to this, and I would like to say something is, don't be afraid to play with this.
Yeah.
A lot of people will call here, I want a best shock out there. I need a stage 5 perfect. We end up crossing them on the sled pad somewhere. Hey, I've got my shocks, you know, they're good, you know, but it's a little bit harsh. You have you played with them? No, it's too much of a shock. You know, don't worry. These are there to be.
It's a knob like the knob on your dash to turn your heat up or down, right? I mean, so yeah.
Go full in, go full out. Try them out. You know, take some notes, and after some point, you get used to it. It's not complicated. Don't be afraid to play with it.
And then you know what you're going to need when you're out doing whatever kind of application, right? When people use nitrogen in their shocks, why do they use nitrogen and not just air? Like, why wouldn't you just pump it full of air?
Because nitrogen is a neutral gas, so meaning that it won't be affected by a change in temperature, change in pressure, like going up in a mountain.
Right.
So hair, basically if you put hair, basically as you go higher, hair compresses. So basically that changes the reaction of the shock. So that's the main reason we go with nitrogen.
It would probably be a cleaner substance, more pure than air too, right? Because in air you would get moisture, possibly. You'd have issues with that as well.
That's true. That's true. The pocket of nitrogen of air is not that much in a standard shock like that, but if you would like a bigger shock, yes, for sure. At some point, you know, we get also 46 bigger body shock that could create that kind of effect. But again, you know, on our shock, we put the best product out there, the best material. Hair is not recommended, and sometimes people think that you know, like a shock like this, a stage 1 shock, this is like a kind of bicycle valve.
Oh yeah.
They put hair in it. Don't do that, please.
Yeah, that's good to know. Well, I got to tell you, okay, first of all, anything else you want to cover on shocks? Now's the educational time. People love that. If they figure they can see something and learn.
Well, like I said, you know, a shock is not complicated. It seems complicated.
How about this? Don't be intimidated by your shock.
Exactly. That's it. You know, we recommend to go at the higher level when you are a rider that wants to, experience like new trails. You go a different path. You know, so but this will give you the flexibility to go there. But don't be afraid to play with them. And also, we are referenced, you know, as if you have any question, you can call in. You can call any of our salesmen. We've got people, you know, in the very professional dealers across the United States, Canada, and Europe that knows exactly what they're talking about, and they are able to help you out. So again, play with the shock, play with the adjustments, so you'll be able to find the right setup.
Right on. Marc?
All right.
I got to thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Very informative. I know the guys out there some people are going to learn something from this. And there's no doubt about it. So, you know, as long as we're learning something every day, that's a good thing. And I have to thank you very much for having us here.
Thanks again. Thanks, guys, for coming in, and we'll be talking soon.